Tony, it's always a pleasure to speak to the number one draft insider before the draft, and I really appreciate your time again this year. Now, the Seahawks have this huge need at pass rush. Are you hearing anything in their attempts to add a veteran before the draft begins?
No, not really. There really aren't too many veterans out there. I've not heard of any big moves. There may be something minor, but really as of just a few hours before we tape this, I was told that it's all quiet on literally the Western Front as far as the Seahawks trying to add a veteran pass rusher before the draft.
What do you make of this Clowney stalemate then? It's lasted such a long time. He's still without a team, and the Seahawks have this huge hole as a consequence at defensive end.
I think Clowney has been his own worst enemy in this entire situation. I'm told that the Seahawks made a lot of overtures. They wanted to bring Clowney back, or they wanted to work to bring Clowney back, and he wasn't very cooperative. It kind of goes hand in hand with what I reported a couple of weeks ago, in that, Clowney would have been more than happy to leave Seattle. But I think what happened is number one, Clowney was asking for an enormous amount of money, which he really wasn't going to get. The fact that you're dealing with this whole coronavirus situation where he wasn't able to meet with a variety of franchises, and franchises weren't able to bring him in to give him a medical exam or interview him or things like that. I think that was a strike against Clowney. I think the fact that there were concerns, even from people close to Clowney, that once he signs a huge contract, he may basically may not play hard. He may just get this one contract with all the guarantees and that's it, which is a concern of a lot of people. Plus, you've got the injury factor. So I think overall there are a couple things conspiring against him, but I also think that Clowney's been his own worst enemy.
So what do you think, in your opinion, what would be a smart move? Would it be just to go and see what the market's like for Everson Griffin? Is it giving the Jaguars a call for Yannick Yannick? What do you think?
Well, I guess what happens with Clowney is there's got to be a point in time where you feel that the reward is greater than the risk. And if he comes down off of his salary demands, which, it was reported that he was down to $17 million. I've heard from people inside his camp it's actually down to $13 million. You've got to, you got to consider that. Then, basically see what happens coming out of the draft. If you get a pass rusher out of from the draft that you're happy with, obviously they're not going to get the top pass rusher. You make your decision based on that. It's just an entirely different situation because it's tough to, you can't fly guys in unless you're, using the owner's private plane to do examinations and things like that. I think what will happen is, unless something breaks on the Clowney front, which I don't expect it to, they'll just hold pat, see what happens, what they come out of the draft with, and then take it from there.
So moving on to the draft then, what are you hearing, or what are your projections, expectations about the Seahawks and their plans for this draft?
I'm told that they really want to move out of the first round, that basically they feel there are about 16 players in this draft that are elite first-round players, and then they don't see a huge difference in the talent level from the middle part of round one until the middle part of round three. So I think what's going to happen is they want to collect extra selections. They want to move into the meat of the draft. So I think they're going to work very hard to trade out of the first round and get extra selections. Oftentimes that's easier said than done because even though a team wants to trade down, you've got to find someone who's willing to trade up and meet your price. But I think that's going to be the number one priority. After that, I don't know. I don't think that they like any of the pass rushers that would be available to them potentially late in round one. You hear Gross-Matos of Penn State being number one. It could be an offensive lineman.
Yeah, you've said previously you think lines early and often really for the Seahawks. Is that what you would see here? Is it going to be offensive line, defensive line focused early in the first few rounds?
Yeah, I absolutely think. I mean, maybe they stick a receiver in there at some point in time, but I think they're basically going to look heavily on both sides of the lines of scrimmage. when they expend their selections.
Now, one of the players I heard you talking about earlier today, who you think is going to go a bit earlier, or this is kind of what you're hearing, is going to go a lot earlier than people think, is Josh Uche at Michigan. Can you tell us a little bit about him and the kind of range you think he might be going in?
Yeah, really a terrific player who's shown a lot of progress the past 2 years. He's a guy who, as a junior, was primarily used as an edge rusher, and he was really the third man off the bench when you look at the talent that Michigan had at the time. But he showed himself to be a very explosive player. I liked him coming into the season. I graded him as a third-round pick coming into the season, where a lot of scouts had him more as a fourth-rounder. He's someone who I think didn't play great as a senior, but that's primarily because Michigan was moving him all around. He had a terrific week of Senior Bowl practices. During Senior Bowl practices, they used him more as in a traditional linebacker role at times, and he really stood out. He did a solid job. We know he's a good pass rusher. We know he's a good athlete. Ran a 4.68 at the combine, only 6'1.5", but still 245 pounds. He is moving up draft boards. I think he's going to go in the top half of round 2, which, or at least the middle of round 2, which I don't think a lot of people are expecting. I interviewed Uche over the summer. He's an articulate kid. I hate to use the word kid. He's an intelligent person. He's motivated to play football. I mean, he's got a lot of physical skills, and he's really has shown himself to have potential as a 3-down defender. So I think you could see him come off the board probably somewhere around starting around pick 38, 39 through the middle of round 2, maybe pick 48 to 50.
What do you think are going to be the main storylines for this draft, Tony? Is it mainly going to be Tua and Jordan Love and Justin Herbert, or is there anything else that could happen that could really get people talking, do you think?
Well, I mean, the main storyline is obviously going to be the presentation of the draft. I mean, unlike years past where you've got screaming fans and, people, it's such a public event. Now it's a private event, especially with Roger Goodell and saying yesterday he's going to announce the picks from his home in Bronxville, New York, which is about 20 minutes south of where I live. I mean, the whole presentation of the draft is going to be a major storyline, considering really the commercial public event that the league has turned it into the past, 15 to 20 years. I mean, Roger Goodell announcing the selections from his house is a lot different than what they had planned in Vegas, where the players were going to come sailing in on boats. Obviously, you've got to look at everything in its totality and put it in perspective. But I think just the whole presentation of the draft is going to be a storyline. Then I think you hit on it. It's going to be Tua. What happens with Tua? Where does he land? There are obviously concerns about his medicals. There are obviously concerns about his durability. But as we say, it only takes one team, and I think that one team to watch is the Miami Dolphins. What do their doctors feel about Tua's medicals? Are they concerned? And when you're looking at medicals, you're not so much looking at it in the here and now. You're looking at, is he going to be able to stay on the field? Is he going to be a second contract type of player? And teams don't feel that Tua is going to be a second contract type of player because his body's going to be falling apart. It's going to drop down draft boards. So it's going to be an interesting story to watch.
What kind of a conversation will that be, do you think, between a prospective GM and an owner before the draft? I want to draft Tua Tagovailoa. I want to guarantee him $30 million. That's what it would be if it was number 5 of your money to this guy. How will that conversation go down, do you think? And what will be the discussion that takes place when making that call?
Well, the discussion actually will begin this week with the medical teams. And the medical teams will relay, what they found, what their opinions are, and what they think the team should do. That will be relayed. And then, if it's any different from what the general manager or the head coaches want, then they've got to justify. If the medical team say, listen, we red flagged this guy, or we failed him. Failure means you're not going to take him. And a team or a general manager or coach has got their heart set on Tua, then there's going to be a very large discussion. A lot depends on whether or not the medical teams are in sync with what the general manager and the coach, specifically the general manager, but also the coach want. If there's a divergence of opinions there, then there's going to be some heavy-duty conversation.
What has it been like for you, Tony, covering the draft this year? Obviously, we've got this coronavirus epidemic going on. How has it changed things for you?
It's been bizarre. I mean, in the sense that, you know, I'm in New York. I'm really at one of the hot spots in the United States. So we've got home quarantine, but usually I'm quarantined in my office the month of March anyway, covering pro days. And I usually don't, except to go to the gym in the morning and, you know, occasionally to relieve myself. I don't leave the chair in my office too much because I'm watching film and I'm working the phones to get updates on pro days. The testing results of the players at pro days. What teams are at pro days? Are there any coordinators there? Are there any position coaches? And that really came to a grinding halt at the end of the second week of March. So there were no pro day reports, which is really unusual for me. And, you know, you try and get an interest. You find out not only the pro days, but which teams are going to work out players individually. And are those teams bringing position coaches or coordinators? That kind of ended. So now it's a situation where there's still plenty to do. There's still plenty of film to watch. And, you know, Pro Football Network will have almost 800 scouting reports on players available. But getting the information as to, say, who the Seahawks may be interested in, what the Seahawks may do on draft day, it's a little bit difficult. It's a little bit different this year. It's a little bit more difficult because you don't have everybody in one building. You have people spread out talking amongst themselves. And even the people talking amongst themselves are a little bit concerned about how it's going to work out, you know, leading up to draft day. They are having their final draft teams are having their final draft meetings this week. Hopefully we'll have a little bit more information. You know, it's just been strange. You got to find new ways to get the information. You got to find new ways to make sure the information is correct. And, you know, then you got to keep it all in perspective to what's happening out there in the real world.
Couple of final questions for you. First of all, can you tell us a bit about the live blog that you are going to be doing on draft day for Pro Football Network?
Yeah, we'll have a couple of guys there, myself and Andrew DeCecco. You know, when the players are selected through all 7 rounds, all 3 days, I'll be doing a short write-up on the player. Andrew will be talking about how the player fits in with the team. And then obviously if there's any breaking news on what's going to happen or what already happened, we'll be uploading that in the blog. So it's basically going to be a continuous thing going on, a lot of opinion, as well as some breaking news, we hope.
Yeah, we'll be sure to check that out. The final question I've got is, obviously you are very close in New York, and the New York Jets have signed a former Seahawks offensive lineman in George Fant. I just wonder, what has been the reaction from the Jets fans to the moves they've made on the offensive line? What has been the reaction to Fant coming in? And is that a team that is going to right itself this offseason and start moving forward?
Yeah, I think the initial reaction to George Fant from Jet fans was not very positive. And I think that's because, you know, the name of Jack Conklin was thrown out there a lot by myself as a front runner. And then the Jets lost out to Conklin, and then they thought they would get the kid from Philadelphia, and they ended up signing Fant. Now, if you had read my stuff at the Combine, I said that Fant was being considered an option for the New York Jets. I think that the initial reaction was very negative because they didn't sign a big name, that big name being Jack Conklin. But when the Jet fans look more and more into Fant, they see the player that he could potentially be. And as they reported at the Combine, one of the reasons they like Fant is because of his athleticism, and Adam Gase is going to use his offensive line with wider gaps this year. I think they warmed a little bit more to Fant. I think the problem that the Jet fans have is it seems this year they really didn't go out and get the big name. They didn't go out and spend a lot of money. You know, they brought in a lot of nice offensive linemen where the Jets desperately need help throughout the entire offensive line. You know, they gave up Robbie Anderson and brought in Brashard Perriman. It was a little bit cheaper for Perriman, but still, you got Sam Darnold there. He had a great rapport with Robbie Anderson. Brashard Perriman, except for 5 games in his NFL career, really has never lived up to expectations. I think here in New York, Jet fans really want Joe Douglas to succeed. And they want, to look at everything he's done as glass half full as opposed to glass half empty. But I think there's also a lot of risk in the fact that, he didn't sign any big names. He brought in a lot of players that look to be okay, and the Jets need a lot of immediate help. The overriding theme with the Jets is, can Adam Gase coach the offense? Can Adam Gase be a head coach? And I think right now the overwhelming belief is Adam Gase it's going to be a real struggle for him, and there are not too many Jet fans in New York who really believe in Adam Gase. So regardless of the players that they bring in, unless Adam Gase turns it around or unless Adam Gase is removed, it's going to be a struggle for the Jets.
Just to finish off on this, what has held the Jets back, Tony? Was it about 11 or 12 years since they were competing for the AFC Championship? So what has held this team back over the last decade or so from actually getting into contention?
The Jets do everything backwards. There's a three-letter word I like to say before backwards, but I don't know if I can say it on your show. And what I mean is they had success with Mike Tannenbaum and Rex Ryan, and you got to give them credit for that. As you said, they went to back-to-back AFC title games. They were half a yard away from getting to the Super Bowl. Then Mike Tannenbaum was fired, and they went through general manager coaching search. But whoever they hired as general manager had to keep Rex Ryan as their head coach. And that turned off a lot of top candidates, and they ended up with John Idzik. And John Idzik's tenure as general manager was disastrous. I mean, it was absolutely disastrous. You look at the picks, you look at the number, it was disastrous. So then they fired Rex Ryan and John Idzik. They hired Todd Bowles as the head coach, and then they brought in Mike McCagnon as the general manager. Again, they did it backwards. You usually bring the general manager in, let him run the show, and then you let him pick the head coach. They fired Todd Bowles. They kept Mike McCagnon around. What happened? Last year I broke the story that just weeks after Mike McCagnon hired Adam Gase, there was a huge rift developing between the two in the Jets front office. A lot of people laughed at me at the time. Turned out to be true. Sure enough, 2.5 weeks after the 2019 draft, the Jets fired the general manager, kept the new head coach, who had never coached a regular season game for the team, and then basically later on brought in the general manager. So I think with the Jets, the problem is they just kind of do things in reverse, and it never works out. I think the overall problem is you don't have a strong personality within the franchise, a guy that can stand up to the owners, and the guy that can make good football decisions. If you look at the Jets' history, their whole franchise turned on a dime in 1997 when they brought Bill Parcells in, and a team that was perennially losers, except for a few bright spots in the late 80s and the early 90s. Bill Parcells was able to turn that franchise around because he is a strong personality and he runs things his way, and he was able to do it the right way. I don't think the Jets have really had that under the Johnson brothers, except when Rex Ryan was here. And Rex Ryan, even though being a strong personality, is someone who's buddy-buddy with the players, and that will only last for a certain time. And when that ends, it kind of falls off the cliff. I just don't think the franchise really wants to make the right decisions to bring in the proper people from the outside who can do the right job. Maybe Joe Douglas can do it for the Jets. We'll see. Maybe Adam Gase can turn it around. I have my doubts about that. But again, I think the problem is the Jets need a strong personality that is separated from the owners, that can make decisions he feels are the right decisions for the franchise, and that's it. They haven't had that for the longest time.
Tony, it's always a favourite moment, and I know the draft's coming when we have an opportunity to speak. It's always a pleasure. I know you're going to be first with all the breaking news on Pro Football Network and via @Tony Pauline on Twitter as well. Many thanks for your time today, Tony.
Rob, as usual, I look forward to our get-togethers once a year. It's been my pleasure.